Ever notice how a friend's kid, one you've seen doing something like chatting away or building blocks, then suddenly they just don't stop.
Yeah.
Not just a one-time thing, but a real change in what they could do before.
Right.
It's confusing, even kind of worrying.
Definitely.
Well, today we're tackling that, autistic regression, diving into cheap ABA, understanding autistic regression, causes, signs, and support strategies. We'll unpack what it really means, why it happens, how to help.
It's a topic with a lot of questions and honestly misunderstandings out there.
Totally. Because when a child seems to lose skills they had, it's easy to think, oh, they're stubborn, or it's a phase.
Yeah, you just figure they'll grow out of it.
But we're talking about autistic regression, a real, sometimes scary thing when people with ASD can't do what they used to.
And it's not about kids being difficult. It's a genuine loss of skills they showed they had.
So let's break that down. What's it actually look like?
Think of it like this. It can be almost any area where a child or even an adult had made progress. Language is huge. A kid speaking in full sentences might go back to single words or even just like babbling.
I can imagine how concerning that'd be for parents, like their kids' words got locked away.
Absolutely. But it's more than language. Social stuff, already complex, gets really tough. A child who loved playing with others might start isolating themselves, avoiding eye contact, or even, not answering to their name anymore.
So they're pulling back from everything around them.
Kind of, yeah. It's like their tools for the social world vanished. Then there's the emotional side. Regression can be like more tantrums, meltdowns over tiny things, or taking way longer to calm down than they used to.
Sounds like these changes can be subtle, at first at least. How does a parent or even a teacher know if it's a phase or something bigger like we're talking about?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And honestly, there's no easy answer. It's recognizing these aren't just one-offs, it's patterns, and how long these changes stick around.
So not just one tantrum, but more of them, and way worse.
Yeah. You got to look at the whole picture, how long it's going on, how bad it is, and how much it messes with their everyday life. If a kid who's been potty trained for years suddenly has accidents again and again, that's a red flag.
It's like a huge step backwards in something they'd mastered.
You got it. And to make it even trickier, this doesn't always follow a neat timeline.
No set age when it happens.
There are some things we see, but it varies. Sometimes it's one of the first signs of autism showing up as early as 18 to 24 months old.
So when toddlers are usually hitting those big milestones.
Exactly. But, and here's the curveball, sometimes it's not until much later, around puberty, often after a kid seemed to be developing just like anyone else.
Wow, so parents might think everything's fine, then bam, these huge changes.
You're spot on. This later onset is super confusing and scary for families because it seems to come out of nowhere. And to add to it, we got to remember, all kids go through what might look like regression, especially when they're stressed or things change a lot.
Like starting a new school year or moving house. Kids regress a bit then, right?
Totally normal. But there's a difference between a kid who's clingy for a few weeks because of a new babysitter and what we see in ASD, which is more constant. Knowing the difference is key.
So how do you tell if it's typical or something to really be concerned about?
It's about, well, looking for big changes that last, ones that really get in the way of a kid's normal life, not just the usual ups and downs.
Okay, so it's not like a light switch, one day fine, next day totally different.
Exactly. It's more like it unfolds slowly. A kid might have more meltdowns, then they kind of pull back socially, then their language skills, they might stop improving or even, get worse.
So more of a slow decline than a sudden drop.
Yeah, you could say that. And that's why catching those early signs, those little things, can make all the difference. But let's say we do see these red flags. What's going on underneath? What's making this happen?
Right, it's not like they just unlearned everything.
Right. No, it's way more complicated. It's almost never just one thing. More like a bunch of factors all coming together at the same time.
Okay, now you've got me curious. What are some of the biggest things that contribute to this?
Well, one major one, especially as kids get older, is something called autistic burnout.
I've definitely felt burnt out before, but this sounds different. What does it actually mean when we're talking about autism?
Think about trying to live in a world that wasn't made for how your brain works. You're always trying to figure out social rules that seem obvious to others, hiding your natural instincts. And honestly, the mental energy that takes, it's enormous.
I can see how that would be tiring. I'm exhausted just thinking about it.
That's just it. It is exhausting. Over time, all that pressure, that effort to just be normal, it leads to burnout. And then sometimes regression is what happens, which is heartbreaking, frankly.
So they're basically running on empty after years of trying to fit in a world that doesn't really get them, like running a marathon with no water.
Perfect analogy. And speaking of things that can be draining for anyone, but especially for people with ASD, there's also the issue of disruptions to their emotional safety.
When you say disruptions, you mean like big changes, moving, changing schools, or can it be smaller than that?
Honestly, it can be all of those things. Moving, changing schools, those are big ones for sure. But even something that seems good, like going on a family vacation, it can mess with that sense of routine that so many autistic people rely on.
So it's not that they don't want to go to Disneyland. It's the change itself, the new place, all the stimulation that throws them off.
Exactly. And when the world feels unpredictable, chaotic, they might regress as a way to cope, to find some kind of comfort, when everything feels out of control.
Like hitting the reset button, going back to what feels safe and familiar.
Right. And then there's something else too, something researchers are still trying to understand fully. It seems there might be a connection between how severe someone's autism is and whether they're likely to experience regression.
So the more pronounced the autism, the higher the chance of regression.
That's what some early research suggests, but we have to say we need more answers here. Autism is so different for everyone, there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
So while these risk factors exist, it's not a guarantee.
Yeah.
There's still a lot we don't know about how this all works.
Exactly. And that's why recognizing it early was so important. Seeing the signs, getting professional help, it can make a world of difference.
It sounds like the more you know, the better, right? But for folks listening who are maybe feeling a little overwhelmed by all this, what can they do? What does support actually look like for someone going through autistic regression?
Well, if it often comes from, like you said, that feeling of overwhelm, not feeling safe, then the key is creating the opposite. Stability, understanding, almost like building a safe space where they can, decompress, find their footing again.
Less chaos, more calm. Makes sense. But how do we do that in real life?
Predictability is huge. Imagine having a map for your day, knowing what's coming, no surprises. That's what we want. Visual schedules, for example, those can be amazing. Instead of telling a child what's next, you show them. A timetable for the day, a step-by-step for getting ready in the morning. It takes away that anxiety, helps them handle transitions better.
Giving them back some control when things feel out of control.
Exactly. And while we're on that, let's talk about communication. We know social stuff can be tough, especially during regression. Using clear, simple language, bringing in visuals like picture cards, social stories, those can bridge that gap, help them tell us what they need.
Meeting them where they're at, not where we expect them to be. Which can be hard, honestly, for any parent, especially with all this going on. But sounds like patience is key.
It really is. And speaking of understanding, we can't forget about managing stress, especially for avoiding burnout. Working with them to figure out their triggers. Could be sensory overloads, social situations, changes in routine, whatever it is, and then finding ways to minimize those. Building in downtime, time for their special interests, self-care, those aren't extras, they're essential.
It's like that saying, put your own oxygen mask on first.
Right, exactly. And last but not least, while home is so important, don't forget about the pros. Therapists, educators, people who really get ASD, they offer invaluable guidance, can tailor things to each person's needs, help them build on their strengths.
So it takes a village, a team of people who understand this is complicated and want to see these individuals thrive.
Yes. It's not one size fits all. It's about teamwork, figuring out what works for that person, celebrating their wins, never giving up hope.
We started asking what it means when someone seems to lose skills. But wow, we've covered so much more. The emotional side, all the things that cause it, and the hope that comes with getting it and knowing how to help.
And if there's one thing I hope people take away, it's that autistic regression isn't the end. It's a detour, a bump, but with compassion, understanding, and the right support, their journey goes on.
Beautifully put. And to anyone out there going through this, you're not alone. Reach out, find others who get it, and never underestimate hope. This deep dive might be over, but the conversation about autistic regression, how we better support neurodiversity in all its forms, that keeps going.